We at Macquarie University acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land upon which this university is situated, the Wallumattagal people of the Darug Nation, whose customs and cultures have nurtured and continue to nurture this land since the Dreamtime. We pay our respects to the Darug people and the Wallumattagal clan, and we also acknowledge and honour the elders of the Darug Nation, past, present, and emerging. Welcome everyone to this very special event, the online launch of the second edition of the Routledge Handbook of Soft Power, edited by Professor Naren Chitty, Lilian G, and Professor Gary Rawnsley. This event is sponsored by Macquarie University, the Australian Institute of International Affairs, and the University of Lincoln. It's my very great pleasure to introduce Professor Maurice Newman, Companion of the Order of Australia, who will launch this book. I'm sure he needs no introduction to many of you, for not only has he enjoyed a long and very distinguished career, but he was also Chancellor of Macquarie University from 2002 to 2008. Born in England, Professor Newman has served important public roles in Australia. His career spans 40 years in stockbroking and investment banking, including as Managing Director and Executive Chairman of what is now the Deutsche Bank Group in Australia. He chaired the board of the ASX from 1994 to 2008, during which time the Australian Securities Exchange was created by the merger of the Australian Stock Exchange and the Sydney Futures Exchange. His has been an expansive and diverse career of service well beyond the financial sector. He chaired the Centre for Independent Studies from 1985 to 1995, chaired Tourism New South Wales from 2002 to 2007, chaired the Australian Broadcasting Corporation from 2007 to 2011, and served as a member of the Prime Minister's Business Advisory Council from September 2013 to September 2015. Having chaired and sat on a number of boards and advisory committees, especially relating to Australian relationships with Asian nations, it is unsurprising that he was invited to chair Macquarie University's Soft Power Analysis and Research Centre, or SPARC, established and inaugurated in 2011 by Professor Naren Chitty, who of course remains the director of SPARC to this day. In 2011, Professor Newman delivered the Soft Power Oration of SPARC, speaking, fittingly enough for the chair of the ABC then, on Broadcasting Australia and typical soft power. So it's a very great privilege and honour to welcome Professor Newman to launch the Routledge Handbook of Soft Power, and I'll hand over to him with no further ado. So over to you.
Thank you very much, Professor Su Min. And can I say it's a great privilege for me and an honour to participate in this conference. I have to say that I'm somewhat daunted that this is such an international occasion. We have so many prominent people from around the world. So I am particularly honoured to participate in the conference and to launch the Routledge Handbook of Soft Power, second edition. And may I particularly recognise Professor Emeritus Naren Chitty, the inaugural Director of Soft Power Analysis and Resource Centre. And can I say to you, Professor Chitty, really this is a great tribute and honour to you as well. Now, ladies and gentlemen, in politics and particularly in international politics, soft power is described as the ability to co-opt rather than to coerce. It involves shaping the preferences of others through appeal and attraction to one's point of view, or sowing disenchantment with another's. Soft power uses culture, political values, and foreign policies, not to mention tech giants, to effect change. Macquarie University Soft Power Analysis and Research Centre, SPARC, played a role in the editing of this book to be launched today. It is Australia's first dedicated centre associated with soft power and public diplomacy. Now, I recall presiding over that inauguration in 2012 as Chancellor of Macquarie, as Professor Su Min just said, it was then we had the inaugural opening by Professor Emeritus Joseph S. Nye himself. Now, SPARC lists its objectives as being, quote, to investigate the theoretical underpinnings of soft power and its relationship with cultural diplomacy, excuse me, international current cultural relations, international relations, and propaganda. SPARC researchers have developed a theory of soft power, which they discuss in, quote, an experiential theory of attraction-based influence, unintended and intended. That's in the book that we are launching today. Now, the theory emphasizes virtue and virtuosity as a factor of soft power engenderment. SPARC emphasizes the ethical use of soft power, characterized by dialogue and cooperation in building future relations between nations, organizations, and communities, all in a rules-based international order. Sociologist Raymond Bohmhardt teaches ethics are standards which impose reasonable obligations to refrain from rape, from stealing, murder, assault, slander, and fraud. Now, once upon a time, ethical behavior in Western societies required the constant evaluation of one's moral beliefs and conduct to ensure that our own and the institutions over which we have influence and help to shape live up to those standards. Within this framework was a presumption of equality under the law. Today, any talk about ethics based on well-founded standards of right and wrong is to apply a judgment based on what humans ought to do. Now, this is a distinctly Western view and in conflict with the cultural relativist claim that rights exist only in the context of particular communities. In some societies, relativism even excuses offences that the state's own norms do not permit. Now, in the West, religion has lost its hold as the ethical In the West, religion has lost its hold as the ethical guardian and inculcator of ethical standards. So the nation of what humans ought to do has become victim to cultural relativism. Indeed, the Bible has increasingly been discredited and its believers mocked for needing a religious crutch by those intent on sowing divisions. Fear of being socially cancelled has cast doubt on absolute values like life, liberty, and property, and allows hostile actors to exercise increasing political and economic power. Today, there is unrelenting pressure to make sure that one's own beliefs fit within the current community expectations, even when they conflict with traditional values. For example, many ethical beliefs in Western society, including the rule of law, the centrality of the family, and personal responsibility, have been undermined by many who believe the state should have responsibility for children as soon as they're off their mother, and that freedom of expression and freedom of choice should be controlled. Schools have become transmission belts for anti-Western beliefs and values. Teachers' associations have softened the curriculum and carry their party line into required reading textbooks, anti-capitalist teachings, and the vilification of Western society. Children are taught their predecessors were white supremacists, wicked colonialists, and slave owners who practiced genocide, stole land, and poisoned waterholes. Now, as adults, why would they defend such a society? There are challenges too to Western worldviews from outside the West. And I know I'm speaking to an international audience of students, researchers, and officials from 35 countries. So I will speak of soft power dimensions of a challenging relationship about which they are all familiar. The sweet and sour relationship between the world's two largest economies is a testbed of soft power theories. The two states espouse political values that don't mix well. Despite this, China is able to influence international organizations to accept its positions on a number of issues to which the West takes great exception. It does this without firing a gun, so it is useful to reflect on China's soft power successes as we enter the new season of toasts and roasts between between the United States and China. China's promotion of its political values, when successful, has the effect of contributing to erosion of trust and self-belief in some quarters of Western societies. Beijing has questioned aspects of capitalism and its ethical construct, emphasizing political rather than economic rights. China's massive charm offensive has been delivered through developing soft power resources. It invests heavily in strategic infrastructure abroad, recruits foreign nationals to Chinese company boards and government bodies, and at times it has resorted to inducements, a practice excluded by Professor Knive from soft power. The impact too, and the work of more than 500 Confucius institutes around the world in furthering and maintaining China's image and objectives cannot be and should not be underestimated. However, the thing about charm offensive is that what is sweet to one palate is sour to another. Now, influence of Confucian institutes has turned sour in several jurisdictions and instances. Indeed, there is no but we should recognize and accept there is no exponent of soft power as effective as the People's Republic of China. It has been notably successful in gaining tremendous influence at the United Nations in just over a few decades. And it has achieved more bang for its bucks than the West has done. It contributes a mere 12% of the regular UN budget, when Western democracies contribute to over 50% of the total. Professor Nye refers to this in his book, The Rise of China's Soft Power. Now, demonstrating this success, Beijing now leads 4 of the 15 UN specialized agencies, compared to Washington's 2. Chinese deputies are present in 9 of those agencies. China's soft power influence has implications for global development. The influence is so great that there are apprehensions in the West that the conduct of an established rules-based international order is now under challenge. China's soft power persuasion was so effective that senior executives of international organizations have been more than supportive. And this is presumably viewed negatively in many, or at least some Western countries. And of course, it's viewed positively in China and some developing countries. China's diplomats would have been gratified to see, as reported in an independent investigation, that World Bank leaders, including the then chief executive Kristalina Georgieva, lent on staff to boost China's position in the bank's Doing Business 2018 report. That report states further that the World Bank even changed data methodology to lift China to up 7 places. Georgieva's personal soft power was not scarred. In fact, she kept her job as head of the International Monetary Fund, and the caravan moved on. Virtue and virtuosity come into play as sweet and sour soft politic factor in the COVID pandemic. Some saw China as being virtuosic in its containment of the virus in Wuhan. Others questioned China's virtuosity in allowing its spread in the first place. Some felt the lockdowns and prickliness about reviews to be lacking in virtue, and despite these mixed reactions, China's soft power virtuosity in UN organization was not in any way afflicted. Head of the World Health Organization, Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, warned against imposing travel or trade restrictions on China, in contradiction to the views of Western societies and states. He was criticized in the West for inventing the term COVID-19, which he described was to prevent the use of other names that can be inaccurate or stigmatizing. And what better soft power is there than when a UN health chief says, quote, China has brought the world time. China's speed, China's scale, and China's efficiency is the advantage of China's system. So that's another success story of Chinese soft power. And against the odds, it relates to, and there's another one that relates against the odds to climate change policy. China has been able to have its position of a developing country generally accepted. And while there is some merit to the argument that China has a large underprivileged rural population, Western states would argue that it may emit more greenhouse gases than the developed world put together, and that it has the world's second biggest economy, a multitude of billionaires, and of course, to its credit, it has a Mars and moon landing. But here again, Chinese soft power has been so successful that it is still accepted as developing by the developed world and excused by the international organization from the onerous emissions reduction targets which face so-called developed countries. Likewise, since it gained entry to the World Trade Organization, Beijing has pursued its own state-led non-market mercantilist approach, which the West argues regularly fails to comply with the protocols of accession. The West, with political and economic virtue templates that are incompatible with those of China, views China's trade policies as opaque. The West accuses China of breaching its intellectual property rights, with the US claiming intellectual property estimated to be worth somewhere around $600 billion have been stolen. China accuses the US of denying an economic competitor advanced technology. But soft power is about the success of one story, and China's story is accepted by many in the developing world and only a few in the West. So it's sweet and sour again. China's soft power influence is perhaps best illustrated in the field of human rights. Despite its own despite its own record being challenged by the West, in 2023, China was elected to the Human Rights Council for the 6th time. And it must be recognized that China's extraordinary international authority has been achieved without a single shot being fired. Now, rather, the Chinese international strategy has been patient and targeted. It has demonstrably been China first and has targeted a reliable voting bloc. If soft power is about hearts and minds, in the United Nations, it is also about hands. It's about voting. And it includes an assortment of states that have benefited from Chinese loans, participants in the Belt and Road Initiative, and many like-minded nations which admire China's growth and have themselves been criticized by the West for their human rights record. And while Belt and Road Initiative is a soft power tool that has earned China great leverage, it has received some pushback related to the debt trap critique. Booming GDP has a soft power effect as well. Foreign misgivings about a Chinese or Beijing style of government was assuaged by its gross domestic product, which trebled in 3 decades. This economic success proved a useful reference for many developing countries, especially in parts of Asia, Africa, and Latin America. The so-called Beijing Consensus saw this authoritarian government market economy combination overtake the dominant Washington Consensus as a superior governance model. But China's rapid growth was thanks to the paramount leader Deng Xiaoping's 1980s market-based liberating reforms. And while it may have attracted an international following, reinforced through economic aid and access to growing domestic markets, this governance model carried the seeds of its own destruction. Chinese leaders were mindful of what happened in Russia and chose to nip it in the bud. The use of soft power within the polity was eschewed in favour of enhanced central control, and some aspects of which, such as the anti-corruption drive, were ostensibly supportive of the rule of law through the domestic interpretation of rule of law, although that has been criticized by some Chinese scholars. The sour side of Chinese soft power has been associated with growing disenchantment as borrowers have come to grips with their debts and a new era of wolf warrior diplomacy emerged. But despite all, the Chinese continue to demonstrate how soft power can co-opt authority without the need for coercion. If coercion becomes necessary later, the target has already been primed. And the Beijing Olympics showed how well the Chinese can showcase their virtuosity, another factor of soft power. The lights on. The book we are launching today and the workshop co-sponsored by AIIA, New South Wales, and the School of Social and Political Sciences at Lincoln University cover all the bases. But perhaps its most important contribution is to illustrate how, with the co-option of modern technology, it is possible to change the international balance of power without a shot being fired. So, ladies and gentlemen, with that introduction, and without further ado, I declare the Routledge Handbook of Soft Power, 2nd edition, launched. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Newman, for that exploration of the theme of soft power and those examples.